You once left me behind. Now I'm just doing the same." That's what my younger brother said after he abandoned my 9-year-old daughter out in the freezing snow below zero, leaving her in such critical condition that she had to be rushed to the hospital. After hearing those cruel words from him, our family bond was officially over. Let me tell you the whole story. I want you to understand why my brother could be so heartless and what decisions I had to make after what happened. Hello, everyone. My name is Harper. I'm 33 years old and live in Chicago. My husband David and I currently run a chain of coffee shops throughout the Midwest, thanks to the steady growth of our business. Our family has built a solid life. We own our home, are financially stable, and share a happy life with our daughter, Elias. She just turned 10 this year and means the world to David and me. But to get to where we are now, peaceful and happy, we had to go through a chapter I'd rather never speak of again. It was a dark time that kept me up at night for months, and it forced me to see my entire family in a completely different light. My story took place exactly 1 year ago. It was a short getaway at the start of winter, just before Thanksgiving. David and I took Elias up to Minnesota to visit her grandparents. Even though she was used to the cold, Elias was still as excited as if it were the first time she'd seen snow. To her, the snow-covered backyard around my parents' house felt like another world. Peaceful, clean, and full of things to explore. We used to think that place was safe, where our daughter could freely enjoy her childhood. But that very place nearly took her away from us, the girl we've always tried so hard to protect. We decided to stay in Minnesota for a week. We put our work in Chicago on hold and treated the trip as a small reward for Elias. After months of studying hard, I felt like she deserved a real break with her grandparents. When we arrived, my dad, Damien, and my mom, Camila, were already waiting at the gate. They were both happy to see the whole family, but nothing made them happier than wrapping Elias up in their arms. Only one person didn't seem thrilled, my younger brother Vincent, who was 22 then. He gave us a quick hello, then went straight to his room. I noticed it, sure, but I didn't think too much of it. Growing up, there had always been a distance between Vincent and me. He was the family's baby, and my parents always treated him more gently. He didn't have to do as many chores and had privileges I never got, but I'd long accepted that. I never really felt jealous because I was his older sister. The first day of our trip went smoothly. But on the second day, something unexpected happened at the 5th coffee shop in our chain, the one I co-own with a friend. A major technical issue shut down the entire operation. If we didn't get there fast, the damage could have run into tens of thousands of dollars overnight. David and I had no choice but to head back to Chicago immediately. Elias, though, refused to go. She begged us to let her stay a few more days. She said she hadn't played enough or seen enough snow and wanted to hear more of Grandpa and Grandma's stories before the break ended. At the time, my parents promised they'd take good care of her, and we trusted them. After talking it over, David and I finally agreed to let her stay. We left that night, thinking we'd be back in just a few days once everything was sorted out, and the whole family would be back together again just like we'd planned. But less than a day later, everything took a completely different turn because of one fateful phone call. After more than 8 exhausting hours of driving from Minnesota back to Chicago, I was completely drained. Endless phone calls, emergency meetings at the office, and scrambling to fix the technical issue at our 5th location had pulled me into a non-stop whirlwind. At around 3:00 p.m., just as I stepped out of a meeting with the electrical system contractors, my head was still spinning with numbers and unresolved problems. Dazed, I sat behind the wheel, planning to stop by the warehouse to pick up some technical documents when my phone started vibrating. At first, I figured it was just another call from a vendor or system operator, but as soon as I picked up, the voice on the other end froze me in place. It was Audrey, our longtime neighbor in Minnesota. Her voice was shaking, panicked, and almost breathless as she called my name. Harper, right? Elias knocked on my door, shivering, saying she needed to call her mom. She barely finished giving me your number before collapsing on my porch. I've already called 911. They're on their way. Hearing her say that, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt impossible. Before I could even process it, Audrey spoke again, this time more urgently. I've tried calling her grandparents, but no one's answering. You must come immediately. I'll stay with her. Hearing her promise to stay with Elias helped me hold myself together, if only barely. I thanked her quickly, asked her to stay by my daughter's side until the ambulance arrived, then hung up and immediately tried to call my parents. 3 calls later, my mom finally answered. Her voice came through the line, calm and soft, strangely unaware of anything that had happened. She asked me, "Is something wrong, Harper?" I didn't waste time. I went straight to the point. "Aren't you home? Where's Elias? Why did she have to knock on the neighbor's door?" Still cheerful, like there was no cause for concern, she replied, "Oh, your dad and I joined a last-minute church volunteer trip. It was overnight. Elias is at home with Vincent." A chill shot down my spine when I heard Vincent's name. I didn't need another word. I knew something had gone wrong. Barely able to speak through the tightness in my throat, I said slowly, "She's being rushed to the ER. Audrey called me. You and Dad need to get back home now." There was a long pause. My mom didn't say anything for a few seconds. Maybe even she couldn't believe it. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost all its earlier ease. She just said they'd head back immediately and hung up. But I knew exactly where they were. The town where their church was volunteering was 4 hours away. Even if they turned around that instant, they wouldn't return to be with my daughter in time. With no other option, I tried calling Vincent. Nothing. I called again and again, sent texts, no response, not a single sign from my brother. At that point, I was losing it. My 9-year-old daughter had been left alone, forced to knock on a neighbor's door in the dead of winter, only to collapse on her porch, while the very people who were supposed to be there for her had vanished entirely from her life. While I was still trying to find a way to reach Vincent, David came out of the office. The moment he saw my face, he rushed over. After I told him what had just happened, he almost collapsed. His face went pale. He gripped my shoulders, his voice shaking. "Elias? Elias? What happened to our daughter?" Hearing the pain in his voice, I couldn't think straight anymore. My hands were still clenched around my phone. So I opened the flight app and started looking for the next flight from Chicago to Minnesota. Within a few minutes of refreshing the page nonstop, I found one, a direct flight to Minneapolis, leaving in under 2 hours. I booked it immediately. While processing the payment, I threw things into a bag and ordered a ride to the airport. As for David, he had no choice but to stay behind. The newly launched store needed someone on site. He was the only one who could step in. Even with fear in his eyes, he nodded, squeezed my hand tight, and whispered, "Go as fast as you can. Call me the moment you see her." I nodded, and deep down I knew. After this flight, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. After what felt like the longest hour and a half of my life, the plane finally landed in Minneapolis just before 7 p.m. When the wheels hit the runway, I was already halfway out of my seat, ready to bolt out of that airport. When I stepped into the ER, I first saw Mrs. Audrey. She stood tucked away in a corner of the hallway, clutching an old coat tightly. Her face was tense, worn out, and heavy with exhaustion. Audrey lived about half a mile from my parents' house, in an old wooden cabin at the end of a dirt road leading out to the edge of town. When I was a kid, I used to go to her house on weekends whenever I needed a quiet place to escape the chaos of my home. But it had been years since I'd been back there, and I never imagined that the same house would become where my daughter would run when she needed help the most. When she saw me, there was a flicker of relief in Audrey's eyes. She'd probably been the only one by Elias's side for the past several hours, and that thought weighed on me with a heaviness I still don't quite know how to name. As I approached, she immediately took my hand and pulled me along. Her hand was cold and trembling, but her grip was firm, like she silently told me, "Your daughter is waiting. You need to be with her now." Through the thin glass of the ICU doors, I saw Elias lying still on a hospital bed. Her face was pale. Her small body looked swallowed up by a sea of thin blankets and medical equipment. A breathing tube covered most of her mouth. Her hand was connected to 4 lines and heart monitors. I froze. There were no words. My chest clenched tight, like something inside me was twisting shut. Audrey stayed beside me. Her voice was soft, shaky, as she began to tell me what had happened. To me, it felt like a nightmare playing out in slow motion. She said it was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the cold began to set in. The wind had picked up and the temperature had dropped to around 0. She was in the kitchen when she heard frantic knocking at the door. Something about it felt wrong, so she rushed to the front. She saw a small girl hunched over on the porch when she opened the door. Snowflakes were falling gently, blowing sideways in the wind, collecting on her shoulders. Her lips were pale, her hands were shaking. Her breath came in sharp, broken bursts. She tried to say her mom's name, my name. Then she slowly began reciting a phone number, mine. as if it was the only thing she could remember. Seconds later, just as Audrey reached out to help her inside, she collapsed right there on the doorstep. Panicked, Audrey immediately called 911 and asked for an ambulance. Then she rode with Elias straight to the hospital and hadn't left her side since. I stood there frozen. The image burned into my mind, Elias alone, walking through the snow, barely holding herself together, trying to reach anyone who could help her, managing only to say a few words before falling unconscious. About 5 minutes later, while I was still standing there staring at my daughter through the ICU window, a representative from Child Protective Services arrived at the hospital. Her name was Karen Mitchell. She met me in the hallway, showed her credentials, and began collecting the initial information. I confirmed that I was Elias's mother and explained why she had stayed behind in Minnesota and who had been responsible for watching her when the incident happened. After taking notes, she spoke separately with the attending doctor and Audrey. Around 30 minutes later, Ms. Mitchell turned back to me. Her voice was firm but professional. Due to the seriousness of the incident, we've submitted the initial report to the local police department for review. They'll evaluate whether a criminal investigation is warranted under Minnesota law. I didn't say anything in response. I just nodded quietly. At that point, I couldn't tell if I was angry, scared, or just sinking into some emotional void I didn't know a name for. Before she left, she told me they'd stay in contact as more medical reports and witness statements came in. Throughout my conversation with Ms. Mitchell, Audrey remained nearby. Before leaving the hospital, she gently took my hand and said she was glad I'd gotten there in time. Then, with a warm, caring look, she wished Elias a fast recovery. I thanked her, told her I'd call if I needed anything. After she left, I pulled out my phone and called David. As the phone rang, I didn't even know where to begin. Because for both of us, what happened to our daughter wasn't just an accident. It was something we had never imagined, never once thought possible in our own family. After just a few rings, the video call connected, and the moment David saw our daughter's face on the screen, he froze. As I began telling him everything that had happened to Elias, he completely broke down. His face crumpled, and he started crying instantly, so hard he could barely get a word out. Through sobs, he kept repeating the same thing over and over. I have to be with her. I have to be with her now. On the screen, I watched as he walked away from his desk, tossed some documents onto the chair, and started throwing things into a bag. He was falling apart right in front of me, and I understood exactly how he felt. I had done the same, dropped everything, left without thinking twice, to be by our daughter's side. But the truth was, it wouldn't just be a financial blow if we both walked away from our responsibilities right then. It would set off a collapse we might never recover from. As I saw David preparing to leave, I did my best to keep my voice steady despite my throat being dry and tight. I told him Elias was okay. I told him she was breathing on her own. I promised I was there handling everything. The truth is, the doctors hadn't confirmed anything yet, but I couldn't let David hear words like pulmonary trauma, hypothermic shock, or possible neurological damage. All I wanted in that moment was for him to hold it together, to stay strong in Chicago for all of us. After the call with David, I turned back toward the hallway, and that's when I saw Vincent rushing into the hospital. He looked frantic, eyes darting around as if trying to find someone. I figured my parents must have finally told him what happened. I didn't wait another second. I walked straight toward him. The moment we came face to face, I asked through clenched teeth, "Where were you?" Vincent flinched at the anger in my voice. He mumbled, not daring to meet my eyes. "I just stepped out for a bit. Thought she was still playing outside." Hearing him talk so casually about leaving my daughter alone, I snapped. The rage was pounding at my temples. I asked again, slower this time, my voice gone ice cold. "What did you do to my daughter?" He looked down, fumbling for an answer. "I thought the door would lock by itself." His trying to justify what happened, like it was just some accident, made my blood boil. But in that moment, a memory suddenly rushed in, crashing into my thoughts like a wave. I remembered when Vincent was 6. He had snuck out to play in the backyard and accidentally got locked out. When our parents found out, they blamed me for it. I got grounded for a week and yelled at like I'd done it on purpose. That night, he came into my room with tear-streaked cheeks, scared, whispering that he didn't mean to get me in trouble. I forgave him. I took the fall for him, just like I always did. I had always been the one to carry Vincent's weight. Always. But not this time. Elias is my entire world. She's the child David and I have protected through every hour, every restless night, every scraped knee. And I wasn't going to let this happen again, not even once. Just seconds after that realization sank in, I looked my brother dead in the eyes. My voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. I'm not letting this slide. You and I were done. After I said it, he cracked. His face twisted into something between hurt and resentment, like I'd just exiled him from his own family. And then with a choked voice, he threw back the one sentence that burned its way into me. You once left me behind. Now I'm just doing the same. In that moment, I felt like I'd just heard the lowest thing ever spoken by someone I once called my brother. Not because he brought up the past, but because he admitted it. He knowingly risked the safety of a child to make a point. At that moment, he didn't see Elias as a niece or even as a human being. He saw her as collateral, payback. Right after he said it, he turned and walked away. He didn't even realize what he'd done went far beyond some old family feud. I didn't move. I stood there blank, numb. But inside, something cracked. Not because Elias was lying in a hospital bed, but because I finally understood the truth. The brother I had once sacrificed everything for never truly understood the worth of a child. And now I knew everything he'd done that day was just revenge for a decision I made a long time ago. As Vincent's figure disappeared down the hospital hallway, I stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. My mind started replaying every moment between us, especially the day I cut him off financially and told him bluntly that it was time to take responsibility for his own life. 3 years ago, when Vincent got accepted into a communications program at a local public college, I had already started building a steady business in Chicago. At that time, our parents were retired, and Vincent had just stepped into adulthood. No one said it out loud, but it was understood I would cover his expenses. Every month I sent him $1,000. Tuition, meals, textbooks. I didn't ask for receipts. I didn't demand updates. I just hoped he'd take school seriously. For a while, it seemed like everything was going fine, until one day I got a call from the bank. They said a new auto loan under my name had just been approved and they were calling for confirmation. But I had never signed anything. When I looked into it, all the details pointed back to Vincent. He'd used my name to co-sign a loan for a car, without asking, without even telling me. I didn't turn it into a big scandal, but that was the moment I decided to stop the monthly support. I called him. I told him 3 years was enough, and from here on out, he needed to take care of things independently. Right after that call, I shut down all financial help. As for the car, the bank agreed to cancel the loan once I refused to be held accountable. Vincent never apologized, never explained. I knew he was hiding it from our parents, and from that point on, he kept his distance, quiet and cold, whenever he spoke to me or my family. And that right there is why he wanted revenge. Right after that wave of memories about cutting Vincent off, I heard my mother's voice calling from down the hallway behind me. When I turned around, I saw her, Camilla, walking quickly toward me, worry written all over her face. My father, Damien, followed closely behind. Their backpacks were still slung over their shoulders, and their coats were damp from the frost outside after the long drive. The moment my mother caught sight of Elias through the ICU glass, she froze. She clutched the strap of her bag across her chest, her hands tightening. My father didn't say a word. His eyes were locked on the small body lying inside, hooked up to machines. After a few long minutes of silence, they both turned to me. My mother's voice was choked as she asked what happened. I took a deep breath and slowly told them everything. How Elias ended up outside alone in the cold while they were gone. I told them it was Vincent who left her out there. As I spoke, my mother shook her head, her voice suddenly faint. She whispered, "No, no way. He loves kids. He would never leave the girl like that." I didn't say a word in response, because I knew deep down that Vincent had always been quiet in their eyes, the polite one, the thoughtful one. And because of that image, they never once considered the possibility that he could be the one who left a child out in the cold. Wanting to check for themselves what had happened while they were away, my father pulled out his phone and opened the footage from the doorbell camera. On the screen, Elias stepped outside around 2 p.m. She had only a light jacket on and hadn't even zipped it up all the way. Underneath was just a sweatshirt and long pants. No gloves, no winter hat. I wouldn't find out until later that before Elias went outside, Vincent had told her she didn't need to bundle up. He said real men could handle the cold, And if she kept hiding under all those layers, she'd always be just a little kid. And Elias believed him. So she stepped out into sub-50 weather, wearing nothing but that. My father fast-forwarded through the video. We watched as Elias played out front. About 10 minutes in, she started to shrink into herself. Her shoulders shook slightly. Her head hung low. It was clear the cold was setting in. She walked to the door and knocked. Paused. Then knocked again. The wind had picked up. One shoulder of her coat was already wet. Her hair was messy. Her cheeks were flushed bright red. The clock on the screen kept ticking. Elias just stood there, knocking softly, every so often glancing around, maybe hoping someone would finally answer. By the 10th minute, she stepped back, stared at the ground, and turned away. She walked off slowly, her back hunched against the cold. And just like that, she disappeared from the frame. When the video ended, none of us said a word. After watching that, I knew whatever image of a well-behaved, gentle son my parents had carried for so long, it wouldn't survive tonight. I turned back to face the glass window of the ICU. But what I felt in that moment wasn't exactly anger. It wasn't quite disappointment either. It was just a heavy weight sitting in my chest, something I didn't know where to put down. A few minutes after the video ended, while my parents were still standing in silence outside the ICU, 2 police officers appeared alongside Karen Mitchell. They informed us that everyone involved in the incident must report to the station that night for immediate questioning. I nodded in agreement. Before leaving, I asked one of the nurses on duty to keep an eye on Elias for a while. I stood there for a few more seconds, watching my daughter through the ICU glass, then turned away, afraid to look back. The police drove us to the local precinct just a few miles from the hospital. When we arrived, Vincent was stepping out of a different vehicle. It seemed he'd already been summoned by the police earlier. The moment my mother saw him, she walked straight toward him, then raised her hand and slapped him. The sound of it cracked through the cold night and froze everyone in place, even the officers, even me. My mother had never in her life hit anyone out of anger, but this time she didn't hold back. And briefly I felt a strange warmth in my chest, not because of the slap, but because she had finally stopped defending him. This time she chose what was right. Vincent stood there like a ghost. In his whole life our parents had never scolded him, let alone struck him, and now this. My father didn't say a word, but his eyes bore into Vincent with something unreadable. Not just anger, not just disappointment, something deeper. One of the officers stepped in, gently reminding my mom that she wasn't allowed to hit anyone, no matter how upset she was. Because there were no security cameras in that area, they said they'd overlook it as long as Vincent didn't press charges. I could tell even the officers were quietly disgusted by what Vincent had done. After that, the 4 of us entered the intake area. No one said a word. Then, just as we stepped through the station doors, my father, unable to hold back his fury, stopped abruptly, turned to face Vincent, and spoke. His voice was tight, sharp as wire. His face was worn, but his eyes were burning. "You know what that girl is going through? She almost didn't make it. I should beat the hell out of you for this." Vincent froze. His face turned pale, his throat visibly tightening. After a few seconds, barely above a whisper, he muttered without looking at anyone, "It's because she cut me off. No one understands what that feels like." My mother looked at him like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Her face twisted with pain and confusion. And me? I just stood there, my fists clenched deep inside my coat pockets. That reason wasn't just petty. It exposed something I'd tried for years not to admit to myself. My brother's resentment had grown so profoundly and bitterly that it had swallowed every trace of family loyalty. About 5 minutes later, Audrey arrived. Once everyone had settled into the waiting area, as soon as she stepped through the doors, an intake officer guided her directly into a room to give her statement. And in that moment, I realized something that hit me harder than I expected. Through this entire ordeal, Audrey, the one person who wasn't tied to us by blood, had stood by Elias's side more faithfully than anyone else. Vincent was called into a separate room to give his statement at the station. My parents and I were asked to wait outside in the holding area. About 10 minutes later, an officer called my father in, along with the CPS representative. I wasn't allowed in the room, but the door was slightly ajar. I could hear my father's voice, low, firm, and sharp with finality. "I'm giving you one chance to tell the truth. If you don't, I'll let them handle you by the book." What followed was a long silence. I could only assume he had shown Vincent the doorbell footage, The part where Elias stood outside in the cold, knocking, waiting, trembling, before giving up and walking away, completely alone. A while later, Vincent stepped out into the hallway. His face was ghostly pale, and in that instant I knew he had confessed to everything. The moment my mother saw the look on his face, she broke down. She leaned against the wall, covering her face with both hands, like she was trying to stop the tears from falling. But they came anyway. My father walked out behind him. His steps were slow and heavy, shoulders slumped like someone who had just let go of the last thread of hope. His voice was low, dry, and final. "You brought this on yourself. Now you'll face the consequences." I didn't look at Vincent after that. I turned away. My eyes focused on the glass doors of the station lobby. Outside, the snow was still falling. The cold was biting. But the cold inside me, that was sharper and far more unforgiving. A little after 11 p.m., we left the police station and returned to the hospital. By then, the ICU hallway had dimmed. Only strips of soft white light spilled onto the cold tile floor. The silence was so deep that every footstep echoed, pressing into the air like weight on the heart. Because Elias was still in critical condition, the doctors allowed special access, taking turns at her bedside during off hours reserved for immediate family. I went in first, then my mother, and finally my father. We were allowed only about 10 minutes beside her, but none of us left after our turn. We just rotated quietly, sitting on the edge of that cramped ICU room, barely big enough for the hospital bed, 2 plastic chairs, and rows of gently humming medical equipment that pulsed like a steady breath. My mother sat on Elias's left side. She never took her eyes off her. Her hand gently held hers, so small, still connected to the IV. Her lips kept moving almost silently. She leaned down, whispering to her through a choked voice, apologizing, saying she was sorry for leaving her alone, that she had no idea things would go this far. Each word was short, broken. Her tears fell slowly and quietly, seeping into the space between them, into a distance she knew she couldn't repair. My father sat near the foot of the bed. He didn't say a single word the entire time. His eyes stayed fixed on my daughter with a heaviness that said everything he couldn't voice. His hands were clasped tightly. His brow was drawn together, like he was trying to hold on to something already shattered. And I knew he was struggling. To him, both Vincent and I were his children. Both mattered. And no matter how flawed his parenting might have been, or how different the paths we took, he'd always believed one thing, that blood would never break. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen lit with an ongoing video call. David was on the other end. He didn't speak much. He just watched Elias, his eyes locked onto her pale face while juggling the chaos of the news store. I could hear the soft clacking of his keyboard in the background, then his voice, barely above a whisper, like he was talking only to himself. "Baby, I see you. I'm here. Rest for a little while, okay?" And I knew he was holding himself together with everything he had. I had seen his strength many times in nearly 10 years of marriage, but never like this. Not in a room full of machines, surrounded by fear, with his child lying silent on a bed. Yet somehow he still spoke to her gently, like nothing else mattered. As for Vincent, after the session at the station, the police hadn't detained him yet. They were still waiting on a formal decision from the prosecutor. But the lead investigator gave us the update. Vincent was required to sign a sworn agreement not to leave town, to stay reachable 24/7, and to stay away from all minors, including Elias. After that was said, no one added a word. We just looked at each other in silence, because we all knew he wouldn't be walking away from the consequences, but they were still waiting ahead. The next morning, around 8:30, I got a call from Karen Mitchell. She told me that CPS had completed its investigation and had officially filed a case against Vincent for child neglect. All the evidence had been forwarded to the Hennepin County District Attorney's Office. That included the doorbell camera footage, statements from me, my parents, and Mrs. Audrey, as well as Elias's medical report from the ICU and the transcript of Vincent's police interview. I listened quietly as Ms. Mitchell summarized Vincent's statement. He admitted to leaving Elias home alone and walking out without informing anyone. He didn't check the door. He didn't make sure my daughter was dressed warmly. Earlier that day, he had even told her that boys didn't need to wrap up in layers, that they should be able to handle the cold. He claimed he thought she was still playing out front. He didn't intend for anything bad to happen, but couldn't give any reason that could excuse his carelessness. When asked why, He said it was because he felt hurt after I cut off his financial support. He said he felt overlooked, that no one understood what it was like to be left behind by his family. When I heard that part, I didn't feel anger anymore, not like the night before. The pain I'd felt had dulled into something else, a hollow, quiet space in the middle of my chest, cold, deep, and impossible to fill with words. I knew then that nothing could be fixed. And what hurt the most wasn't that Vincent was about to be prosecuted. It was the realization that between people who once called each other family, all that remained now was a distance that none of us could ever cross again. After 3 days in the ICU, Elias finally began to show signs of recovery. She was breathing on her own again. Her respiratory reflexes were stable, and the doctors removed the ventilator. One by one, her vital signs began returning to safe levels. On the morning of the 3rd day, the doctors informed us that Elias could be transferred to the intensive care recovery room. She was still weak, but she could open her eyes, softly whisper "Mom," and wince every time the nurses changed her bandages. Every minute I spent sitting by her bed, I held her small hand as gently as possible. Her fingers twitched faintly, just enough to tell me she was still here, still connected to this world. That evening, the issue at our 5th coffee shop in Chicago was finally resolved. My business partner had traced the problem to a system coordination error and took care of the immediate financial damage. Once everything was stable, David caught the earliest flight back to Minnesota. Around 8 p.m., he walked into the recovery room wrapped in a thick charcoal gray coat. When Elias saw her father, she blinked twice, slowly raising her hand like she was trying to reach for something in front of her. In a hoarse, fragile voice, she tried to say, "Dad." And in that instant, David rushed forward and pulled her into his arms like nothing could have stopped him. Elias buried her face into his chest and burst into tears like she'd been waiting for that embrace for 3 whole days, unable to say a word until now. But what she said next brought the entire room to a stunned silence. Just after the tears began to slow, Elias nestled her head against David's shoulder and whispered, her breath uneven, "Don't worry, Dad. It's okay. I remembered what you said, to find someone who could help. I'm big now." My heart clenched so tightly it felt like I couldn't breathe. I turned away, covering my eyes like I was trying to hide from something too heavy to face. I didn't know if I was overwhelmed with emotion, if I was grateful, or just filled with guilt. Maybe it was all of it at once. She had nearly died because of our failure, because of an adult's carelessness. And yet here she was, trying to comfort us, trying to reassure the people who were supposed to keep her safe no matter what. A few seconds later, I looked over at David. I saw tears rolling silently down his cheeks, falling onto our daughter's face. My parents stood behind us, both crying softly as they listened to each word Elias fought to say. There we were, 4 adults surrounding a 9-year-old girl who had just made it through a life-threatening ordeal. The room was quiet, filled with love, and things no one could quite put into words. For a moment, I thought everything had finally settled, that we'd found a pause in the storm. But I was wrong. There was still one final thing left to happen. The next morning, while David sat at Elias's bedside feeding her spoonfuls of thin soup, Vincent suddenly appeared at the doorway of the recovery room. He looked worn out, sunken eyes, dark circles, a face hollowed by days without sleep. The moment we saw him, everyone froze. None of us expected he'd dare show up here. Before I could speak, he stepped quickly toward Elias's bed and dropped to his knees. In front of the entire family, he broke down, crying, pleading repeatedly. He said he didn't mean to do it, was only gone for a few minutes, and never thought Elias would go outside. Then he begged us to help him avoid jail. His voice didn't carry the weight of remorse. It was filled with panic, an overwhelming fear that had nothing to do with Elias and everything to do with himself. But before he could finish his desperate plea, my father stepped forward. His eyes had gone cold. He raised a finger and pointed it directly at Vincent. His voice dropped, not because he was trying to stay calm, but because his fury had passed the point of control. He said, "Stop lying. I know you left her on purpose, and even now, you're still standing here twisting the truth. Did I raise you to be this kind of man, Vincent?" There was no holding back anymore. Something inside my father broke in that moment. Years of trying to be the fair, balanced parent shattered. Without waiting for a response, he grabbed Vincent by the arm and yanked him out of the room, using a force I didn't know he still had left in him after retirement. The man who had once been the anchor of our family, steady, patient, always calm in every storm, now had nothing to hold on to. And my father, known for never raising his voice through all the chaos we'd weathered as a family, couldn't even hold in a sigh. At the Hennepin County Courthouse in Minneapolis, on the 5th day after everything happened, Vincent stood for his preliminary hearing. I was there that day, representing our family, to witness what had already been set in motion. The hearing was closed to the public. It lasted less than an hour. After formally presenting the charges, the judge confirmed that Vincent had entered a guilty plea as a part of a negotiated agreement with the prosecutor's office. The court sentenced Vincent to 9 months in jail, citing the seriousness of his actions. After serving his sentence, he would be placed on 18 months of probation, during which he would be prohibited from contacting any child under the age of 12. He was also required to complete a mandatory ethics rehabilitation program and a civic responsibility course. In addition to the primary sentence, the judge imposed a $7,500 civil fine, which would be directed to the county's support fund for juvenile victims. Shortly after the hearing, the university where Vincent had been enrolled issued an official notice of indefinite suspension. His graduation plans, just 1 semester away, were formally canceled. After my brother officially received his sentence for what he'd done, the atmosphere within our family began to shift quietly, heavily, in a way that's hard to put into words. My parents, too, were forced to face what they once believed was harmless. The times they defended him, the times they looked the other way, the times they stayed silent over the small mistakes. All of it now had led to a consequence none of us could deny anymore. 3 days after the hearing, Elias was discharged from the hospital. She was still weak, coughing in short fits whenever she changed position, but she could eat soft food and hold brief conversations. We decided not to stay in Minnesota any longer. Before we parted ways, before I brought Elias back home to Chicago, my father paused in the hospital hallway for a long time. His eyes, dulled by age and something deeper he couldn't name, met mine. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said slowly, "I'm sorry for not being able to protect your daughter." I didn't say anything in return, just gave a slight nod. There was no anger left in me, no blame, only an old kind of sadness that returned without warning, quiet and steady, like a cold wind slipping through the seams of your coat. And I understood that apology wasn't meant for me alone. That entire afternoon, my mother never once left Elias's side. She held David's hand and the small hand of her granddaughter, as if keeping the 3 of them close was the only thing she still had control over, the only thing she could do right at that moment. And in that silence, I finally understood something. Some fractures in a family don't start with something big. They begin with the little things no one ever bothered to fix, until one day there's nothing left that can hold it all together. And today, exactly 1 year since the day my daughter nearly didn't make it, I sit on the front porch during the first early winter afternoon of the new year, watching Elias slowly pedal her bike along the gravel path. She's more stable now. She still startles at the sound of strong wind, doesn't like being alone for too long, and always double-checks the door before stepping outside. But she's grown braver, more aware, and most importantly, she somehow managed to hold on to the brightness I once feared had been lost after that day. My parents still call regularly from Minnesota, not with general questions about the household like they used to, but with specifics, asking about each meal, every cough, and how well Elias slept the night before. Since then, my husband has become noticeably more sensitive each winter. He doesn't complain about the wind or the cold anymore, but every time the first snow begins to fall, he stands quietly at the window for a long while, as if trying to hold on to the memory of something that nearly slipped away forever. Vincent is currently serving out his probation in St. Louis Park, near the outskirts of Minneapolis. I haven't spoken to him, and he hasn't tried to reach out. Our connection ended the day my daughter was left in the cold. I sent a small gift basket to Mrs. Audrey's house a few days ago. It wasn't much. Just a quiet thank you to the one person who stood by my child when none of us were there. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. Never assume a child is okay just because they haven't said anything. Sometimes the quietest things are the very ones that cost you the most. That's where my story ends. And before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, the ones still here watching, listening, staying with me through the very last moments of this journey. Do you believe that 9 months in jail, 18 months probation, and a $7,500 fine were fair consequences for what Vincent did? Was it enough, too much, or not nearly what the situation called for? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Please share your perspective in the comments below. Your voice matters to me more than you know. And if this story touched something in you, if it stirred anything deep inside, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me on the road ahead. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Harper.